When you grow up in a home where alcohol and drugs are common, it can be difficult not to get pulled into a generational cycle of addiction. It's what you know, it's what surrounds you, and too often, it's paired with mental health struggles and abuse, making substances feel like the way to numb or escape the pain.
I reflect on being a little girl at 6, 7, and 8. And we talk about playing with dolls and dressing up and, doing girl things. And I never had that. I never experienced any of that.
Today's guest on Grieving Out Loud, Toni Handboy, faced an extremely difficult childhood shaped by trauma and loss. She experienced abuse, and her parents were often absent due to addiction. She was later taken from her grandparents and separated from her Lakota roots, moving in and out of foster homes before eventually ending up in a juvenile detention center. During that time, Toni says she struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts.
The love of dandelions, because that's what kept me alive. Peeking out a little window like this and seeing dandelions, and I thought to myself, I would see them wilt, and I didn't realize the significance of what a dandelion actually was. And that's what helped me stay alive.
Like many who grow up around addiction, Toni eventually turned to drugs in an attempt to numb her pain, and the cycle continued as her substance use began to affect her own children.
My son, 1999, on his birthday, on March 30th, he was 3 years old. And he said, "Mom," I was drinking a lot, and he said, "Mom," he said, "can you come to my birthday party? But you're going to be there, right, Mom?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there, son."
While many are not able to break free, Toni has overcome the generational cycle of addiction and has been in recovery for nearly 2 decades. Today, she's not only rebuilding her own life, she's helping others who are struggling with substance use disorder. In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, Toni shares her difficult but powerful story, what finally led her to seek help, and the message she hopes will reach others who feel trapped by addiction. Toni Handboy's story is about survival, recovery, and the long road back to identity. A Native American woman whose life was shaped by trauma, loss, and addiction, Toni knows all too well how dark things can get. During the depths of withdrawal from substance use, she reached a point where she believed there was no way forward, only a plan for her life to end. But in a moment of sheer exhaustion and courage, she walked into a treatment facility, broke down the door, and asked for help. That decision changed everything. Now, nearly 20 years into recovery, Toni is a licensed addictions counselor, a clinical supervisor, a nonprofit leader, and the director of the Wapta Counseling Service on the Cheyenne River Reservation. She has dedicated her life to helping others navigate addiction, mental health struggles, and the challenges of healing. Toni, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I am so happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here to share my story and some of the work that I've done with our community and in the state of South Dakota.
Let's start from the beginning. And I think one thing that many people who don't know a lot about life on reservations don't really understand some of the social problems that families face there. And as a child, you experienced that firsthand. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, as I've gotten older in my age, I've realized that I was really born what we would call rich tradition. My grandmother and grandparents raised us. We were taught a lot in life as children by our grandparents and pretty much shielded from some of the dynamics of the social ills of what was happening in our family. And I started to recognize that, my mother was absent from my life a lot and my father wasn't around. And then I realized the bigger picture as I got older and how much it had impacted my life, that my mother was absent from my life, pretty much abandoned us as children. And, there was 11 of us siblings. And over time, I started to realize that it was the addiction that and mental health that had impacted the parenting from my mother and father. And so I always realized, I thought to myself, as I've gotten older, and I didn't really understand like poverty, addiction, mental health, or any of those big words. And I started to realize how much it had really impacted me. My grandparents always tried to make everything okay. We always had food, we always had clothes, we were taken care of the best that she could do until DSS stepped in. And, DSS stepped in and took the kids away, or took us away.
Including you. Yeah, right. So you had 11 siblings.
Yes.
And the Department of Social Services stepped in. Your grandmother and was raising you.
Yes.
And do you know why what was happening? Why did they step in?
Well, my grandmother just naturally took care of us when my mom was gone. And eventually it was reported that we didn't have any guardianship. My grandmother traditionally didn't file for custody, and my mother was absent, and she was drinking and in and out of mental health facilities. And so we needed guardianship because of the school system. And finally, my grandmother fought for custody of us, and DSS stepped in also to fight for us and to provide us a safe home. And they did a home study, and come to find out, my grandmother's home wasn't enough for DSS. It wasn't a living condition for us to live in.
Toni and her siblings were placed in the foster care system, where she lived with several different families from the age of 6 to 9. None of them were Native American or shared the cultural practices that she had grown up with.
Once we were removed from our environment with our grandparents, it felt like that's when the beginning of my I call it corporal, training of identity started to take place.
Yeah, tell people what the problem is or what the issue is with being separated from your culture, your relatives. For people that don't understand, can you explain that?
You have the security. I had a security of understanding that I was going to be placed, with relatives, or placed with people like me as Indigenous. Our home, which was close, on the reservation, that was my little belief in my mind as a child, is that I would still feel safe. I'd still feel secure. I'd still relate to somebody. And what I realized, that I didn't relate to anyone else because of being Indigenous, and my grandmother and my grandfather were traditional, and they had spoke Lakota fluent language. The wraparound of comfort and care in our family by the grandparents, and the teachings and the stories changed. The dynamics changed drastically. So we were detached from that teaching of what grandma would teach us, or what our grandfather would teach us, and the stories they told us. And originally, during that generation of time, I think it's between 7 to 9, 6 to 9. Those are very vital times in a child's life. And that's when you, like a sponge, soak up everything that's taught to you. And we were disconnected from that completely.
Are you angry at the state for taking you away from your grandparents? Do you think that was in any way truly necessary?
I think now that I look back at it over the multiple years of, questioning um, the state's decision, because of the traumatic, there's always different sides and dynamics to stories, and they don't usually come out until you're a lot older. And so my story is public, and my family knows my story is public. They know now that, there was things going on in the home that, weren't appropriate, like the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the neglect, the abandonment, um, emotional and mental abuse, the trauma. The grandmother did her best. My grandmother did her best to protect us from anything that would happen, but she was never always around. And so there was times where, I've tried to tell my grandmother and my family what was happening, and I was looked at as, a liar, that what happened to me wasn't true. And then it became family, not just me, but it was other family, children, and myself that had started to tell what was happening. And I believe that's what initiated, the state response to step in.
So what I hear you saying is that the story isn't black and white, right? So that
Right,
there are all these things that were happening, um, and things that were happening to you. Maybe you weren't protected as you should have been as a child, right?
right,
And
right.
so the state steps in, thinking it's wearing the white hat, right?
Mm,
Being the good guy
right,
to take you away from that and place you in other homes. But in the process, you lost your identity and your culture.
right. I lost that. I lost the direction, and I lost the language, and some of the teachings that would have been passed down from, generation from my grandparents to me, and that disconnect from my mother, the relationship with my mother. And then, just identity in general as a female, as a Lakota, as a woman, I didn't realize that, the sexual abuse would take me from being a little girl to being a grown mental type of setting in my mind, to because I was always a survivor, like always fighting, to protect myself. And so I grew up really fast, emotionally and mentally. So when I was 9, I was probably in my 13 years because I had to adapt to survival skills because I was being shipped here and there and everywhere. I was with other children, other families, different group homes, different foster homes. And I look at my family and my siblings, my brothers and sisters, and it wasn't just me. They have stories too that, that I'm finding out later, that were similar to mine. And, I realized that I always thought it was just me. I would cry sometimes and I would be like, why is my life so hard? Why do I have to suffer? Why me? And why am I going through what I'm going through just because I told what happened to me? And, I felt like I was being punished, and so there was times where grandma continued to fight. Although, literally, go to the court, talk to DSS, talk to the directors, talk to ICWA, talk to whoever else she could because she still wanted us children with her. And she fought for us for many years. And sometimes she would get we would get visits, and we would have moments in time where my mom had her good days, and she went to treatment or got her mental health care done, and she was stable. And then we would be able to be with her for a period of time. It always seemed so short lived. and then we would be in a different environment again. And so I always held on to hope with her.
Did you ever get any sort of counseling or treatment for the sexual abuse that you endured as a child?
I didn't really start to disclose a lot of that happened to me until I was 13 years old, because I started with addiction at an early age. I was 9 years old. I remember smoking marijuana with relatives.
At 9?
Yeah, with relatives. I didn't feel 9. And sometimes when I go back and look at, I don't have very many childhood pictures, but some of the ones that I do have, I go back and look, and I look at my picture, and I look in my eyes. I look at my body language of what that picture is showing me. And I try to imagine where I was at mentally at that time. And I think when I was 9, I was probably, like I said, 13. I really felt like an adult. And I started smoking marijuana, which I never really thought anything of marijuana at the time. And then I started picking up other little habits over the years, like 10, 11. We started to have rush. And I don't know if very many people know what rush is. Maybe there are people that do know. And it was a temporary high. It was only like seconds of a high. And it would take me to a place for seconds. And sometimes it would numb things, like just my body and my mind. And I started to escape through those little bits of relief.
Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K-12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe. Rush, also known as poppers, are a liquid chemical substance that produce vapors. When inhaled, poppers can provide a sense of euphoria and heightened sexual pleasure. Health officials warn they're dangerous and should never be inhaled. They can cause sudden drops in blood pressure, irregular heart rhythms, and in some cases, death. Now, despite those risks, the FDA says poppers are still widely available online and in adult novelty stores, often labeled as nail polish remover or cleaning products.
To be honest, it's used in, like, when a person goes into those Pornhub places and they snort high to give them a heated, sensual, sexual feeling. And so there come in little vials, and we used to get those off of a street vendor. And it's really weird now, because when I think about it, some of this stuff is still sold in some of these little shops, and easy access, no question of how old you are. And and so, experimenting, right? When you're that young, you're going to try something, no matter what it is, if you want to escape from what you're going through in your childhood life. And so that's what was happening with me. I was being taught by older kids what to experiment with, and not really asking questions. I just wanted to try something different. And that's what took me into the experiment of other things like LSD and mushrooms. I never had tried that. I tried it when I was 11 or 12. My grandmother had a visitation with us that weekend, and I ended up trying it with some friends, and I fell out. I passed out and didn't wake up for a while, and they called like the cops and ambulance, and they took me back to my grandmother's place, of course, but then they came and took me and put me in JDC, and I was only like 11 years old.
Oh,
And I never, nobody ever taught me, nobody ever said, don't do drugs. Nobody ever said, don't do things that you don't know what it is, and so
right.
I was really naive, I can say, and I was picking up things that people would introduce me to.
This was just your environment. And so
Yes.
I'm thinking a lot about everything that set you up for
Mhm.
addiction, Toni. Genetics, your
Right.
mother was an alcoholic. And do you know how, what the percentage is of Native Americans who suffer from substance use disorder or the rates? I know what the overdose death rates are. I know
Right.
it's much higher than the rest of the population. And years ago, I went on the reservation and did a series about alcoholism and just how Native Americans metabolize alcohol different. And now, I mean, that was years ago. And then it was
Right.
alcohol and then meth, and now it's fentanyl,
Right.
so what is do you know like the percentage or how much more likely someone of Native American descent is to suffer from?
So I sometimes look at statistics too, because of, my advocacy work. And I look at the foster care rate of how many kids are in South Dakota foster care among the 9 tribes. We have 1,200, almost 1,200 kids in foster care in South Dakota alone. And come to find out, on our reservation, we have 6 native foster homes, 6 non-native. That's only 12 foster homes on our reservation.
Yeah.
And Cheyenne River alone has 174 kids in foster care. And that means that we only have 22 kids here locally. The rest of those kids are off the reservation. And the reason why I study that is because the impact of what it did to my life. And then I look at the grandparents taking care of grandchildren. And the reason why that is because my grandmother took care of us. And so then if we have grandparents taking care of grandkids, it's because obviously sometimes the parents are not taking care because of the addiction, because of the mental health. So 89% of grandparents are taking care of grandkids on our reservation.
That is
89%.
staggering. That's a staggering number.
The reason why I know that is because the aging Council of Aging for Native Americans did a study. They did a survey, and they went all around the reservation and they surveyed elders. And that's how we found out that 89% of those elders, out of how I think it was 200 or 300 surveys they did, took care of grandchildren. So I could estimate that probably over 80% of our people and parents are suffering with addiction and mental health.
Right. It makes me so sad. Those high numbers and the children, like you were a
Mhm.
child born into this, and you suffered so much trauma, which sets a person up for addiction anyway. Plus,
Right.
you have the genetics and the environment, everything that you described to me
Yes.
just set you up on this path. And sadly, you were able to escape it. And we're going to talk about that. But
Right.
sadly, most people can't. They end up
True.
dying young, dying young.
During your ages, yeah. We see the
Mhm.
trends have changed dramatically in the past 5, 10 years. We have 30-year-olds, 20-year-olds dying. And people out in the community are asking why, why now? Why are they dying in their 20s and 30s when they used to die when they were in their 50s? And
And 50 is still young, and 50 is
yeah,
still lower than the, national life expectancy of 70
right.
something, right?
I'm
75 or whatever it is.
I'm 50, and sometimes I'll talk about my mom passing away. and I'll say, my mom died of alcoholism. And, really truly traditionally what she died of is trauma. Trauma she didn't talk about. It's what ate her up inside. And the secondary impact to that was the addiction. And so, she never had the chance to tell her story of the things that she went through as a little girl. And so when I think about her story, I sometimes remember, I took care of her for the last 9 months of her life. And I started to reflect on her life, and I realized she died when she was 51, and I am 50. And sometimes I think about it now, and I talk to my son, and I'm like, I realize it, and it just hits me so hard because I'm telling my son, like, grandma died, when she was 51. I'm like 50 now. And I was telling him, it's like, it's hard to connect that because it felt like she was so much older, but she was so young. Um, and she died and didn't get a chance to have time with her grandkids or, just live.
Yeah, you've managed to break a cycle.
Yes.
And I want to talk about what happened before you broke that cycle,
Yes.
which is it's just so important that there be more people like you able to
Mhm.
break these cycles. But so we were talking about how you were 9, 10, 11, and using all these different drugs, substances. And I'm guessing that continued through your teenage years until
Yes.
eventually your substance of choice became methamphetamine.
Yes. When I go back and think about it, my life feels like it's been so long. And when I reflect on all the group home placements I was put in South Dakota, and I was put in, I was put in Plankinton, I was put in Guardian Mountain.
We should mention that Plankinton is a reform, like a
Yes,
juvenile detention center,
yes,
basically, form school or whatever.
Plankinton State Training School.
So you were institutionalized. And what ages were you during this time?
I was around 10, 11,
Oh,
12.
man.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh.
10, 11, and 12.
And so you go from neglect and abuse in your family
Mhm.
to being in various foster homes
Mhm.
to being institutionalized by the state.
Right. Mhm. And that's why I call it corporal, because I went from this environment that I wanted to have changed or to protect me from the things I was going through. I was so secure around grandma, but yet she couldn't always be there 24/7. And so she did try, because she put us in the dorms and then she put us in the Pure Indian Learning Center, but it was just briefly. And so I think about that environment that I was removed from and into the environment I was sent to. And then I realized it was so corporal, if you really think about it, because everything was so formal. Like,
Mhm. It wasn't a loving home. You're not,
right.
and it's constant change. You were going through constant change as a kid,
Mhm.
and you're not surrounded by love and care, and you're a
Right.
victim of sexual abuse.
Mhm.
You're using substances to cope
Mhm.
with pain at a very young age, and no one is really taking care of you,
Mhm.
the child. No one is doing that.
Right.
It's just punishment, right? Punishment.
And being a little girl, I was not taught things I needed to know as a female, as a little girl, as a woman, as a young Lakota woman becoming a woman. There's so many teachings now that I realize it that I missed as a child. And I mean, when I'm talking like this, I reflect on being a little girl at 6, 7, and 8. And we talk about playing with dolls and dressing up and, doing girl things. And I never had that. I never experienced any of that. It was And I guess that's why I became what they call a tomboy back then, because I started dressing different, started covering my body in layers, and I started to wear hats so I look like a boy. I just because I wanted to protect myself.
You were robbed of your childhood. You really
Right,
were robbed of your childhood.
right. And so as I started aging, I started realizing that I was lost, identity was lost, direction was lost, focus of who I was, where I was going in life was lost. I just went with the flow, with where the state would put me here, the state would put me there. I always traveled with the little, box of clothes or whatever I would, belongings of mine that I had, and, keepsakes of what I tried to hold on to. And the corporal life, and why I refer to it as that is because I had to wait, I don't know if you ever heard the stories of through poem placements and what it's like for people, but I mean, I had to wake up at 5. We had to get ready at 6. We had to do chores and do PT and, do groups and do morning meditations and, don't throughout the whole day, everything was scheduled. Didn't have a choice to live or breathe or do anything we wanted to do. It was so set and scheduled that we were required to. It was structure, like complete structure. And I never had been taught certain things that I think about now, and I'm, trying to reflect on things, and I realize I wasn't as formal as just learning and experiencing life freely. It was having these things pushed and taught to me that I had to learn, that I was told to learn, and one experience I'll talk about, I know, I they always talk about being safe. They want us to learn. They want us to be in a safe environment, as moving me from my grandma's to another environment in foster care and then group home care in the state. Their intentions, I'm yet to really truly try to identify, but the intentions were to be in a safe environment. When I was in one of the group homes, I had depression, and I had all these mental health conditions happening with me that I didn't truly know. And so I had to experience, my mental health in my own world. And I was punished for it. And I got suicidal, and, they put me in a isolation room, and isolation room in a dark room. And I was in a dark room for, I don't know, 2, 3 days. And the warden, or the guy that would come to us with the group, they would come see me as a group every day. And they would ask me, are you ready? Are you ready to open up? Are you ready to share? Are you ready to come out? And, I was so hidden in darkness and depression that I couldn't think or process or anything. I was just shut down mentally as a young girl, and I didn't want to be bothered. And so they left me in there in the dark. And I've wrote a story about this, and I've wrote a article about it, but that's what I had, the love of dandelions, because that's what kept me alive. Peeking out a little window like this and seeing dandelions. And I thought to myself, I would see them wilt, and I didn't realize the significance of what a dandelion actually was. And that's what helped me stay alive. And then I think it was the third day when I started to break, and I shared with them what happened. I mean, I started sharing my life and opening up to strangers and opening up to other kids. And
It just breaks my heart, Toni, the way you were treated. Because if somebody would have just put their arms around
right,
you as a child and showing you love and compassion instead of punishment,
Yeah.
And it's a miracle that you survived that. But the littlest tiny thing, the seeing the dandelion, it
Mhm.
reminds me of Life's Man's Search for Meaning,
Right.
that
Right.
book.
And you think a dandelion is a weed, and then I realized later that dandelions have so much significance to people. And it's a healing, it's a healing flower. It really not a weed, and some people think they're weeds. They're so, let's just cut them down. Let's just get rid of them. Dandelions don't need to be in the grass. And when you read up on dandelions, they like have so much purpose and powerful um meanings in a person's life, but also medicine. And so I brought purpose to my life when I started to realize that I seen that dandelion transform from just being the flower to being the wilt, and then they release and they fly away. And so I realized that my life was like that. I had to let go of protecting my shell of everything that happened to me. And then I had to agree to just start releasing everything that I held inside so long for so many years, that I had to trust. And I had to trust who I was sharing it with. And they were strangers. They weren't strangers. Actually, we lived together. We were group home, we all were there for our own purposes. And so I had to trust them with my story, my most deepest, darkest pain of things that I went through and why I wanted to die. And, and so that's when I started to release who I was at that time at 13, 11 years old. And I had to make that choice to allow to trust others. But then the corporal part of how things were addressed in life with me was not as compassion, like Warushula, our Lakota people, indigenous people talk about compassion, care, love, um, that warmth that you talk about, that, that is what I did not have.
Mhm.
It was you tell us what's going on with you, or you're not coming out,
You're punished. Yeah, you're
they're
punished. And
punished.
so eventually you aged out of the system, right?
Right. Mhm.
And then what happened?
Actually, I was placed in the foster home when I was in our home, Parkston. I met my foster mother, Annie, and I didn't think I was going to be picked for foster care because I was too old. I was
Huh,
13.
13. Okay.
Yeah, and I was told that a lot of Native children don't get placed because you're too old. A lot of foster parents like younger children, and so they said, if you do not get picked back up, we'll try to get relative placement. And so this woman, my mother, um, chose to have me as her foster child, her first foster child. And I went to her home for a visit. And when I went to her home for a visit, I didn't know what to expect. She was white, and not very white, but she was white in my view. And then I went to her home, which is a really big home. It was like a mansion to me because I never really had a home. And and I got to meet the family, and she showed me my room. I never had a room before in my life, my own bed, my own home to call home. And then I got 2 more visits with them. And one night when I got to move in is when I started to feel afraid because they were white. I didn't know if they really truly wanted me because I was Native and I didn't feel comfortable. And I told my foster dad that. I tried to take off, and him and I stood in the driveway, And he told me, he said, you didn't even give us a chance. He's like, you don't know us. You need to learn to know who we are. Give us a chance. We love you, and picked you. And, just, and he did. He gave me love, and he invited me, into their life. And so there I was taking another leap. I'm going to trust them. And so I did. I moved in, and then I started to find out the real story about my mother's background. They raised their kids in Pine Ridge by Pine Ridge with a lot of other Native kids and a lot other Native families. And she knew a lot of Native language. She knew our culture. And then I started to just trust them. And then I started to late nights. Her and I would stay up hours to 3, 4 in the morning. And I would just tell her, I was just telling her everything about what I went through in life. Things that I never got to ever tell people or anybody, because I kept some of the things that happened to me because it was so traumatic, and I got to share with her my life. And that's when we built our trust. And so, and I stayed there with her till I graduated. And I was 18 years old when I left, but I was so afraid to leave my environment that I didn't think I was going to survive when I got 18. So I attempted suicide when I was 18. I took an overdose of pills.
So even though you were living in what would be considered an accepting and loving family from 13 to 18,
Mhm.
you still wanted, I guess that depression that had been with you was maybe never treated too.
Right. My foster brother that we had in the house had a knee surgery, and he had pills like pain pills.
Mm.
And I was so afraid because I knew I was going to be leaving. I knew I was going to be turning 18. I knew I was going to be moving out. I was going to be graduating. I didn't know what my life was going to be like. I was so afraid to leave this environment that loved me so much, that gave me everything that I ever could have. I worked for the VA. I was enrolled in on-the-job training, employment when I was 13. So I worked my whole years there. I worked for the VA, and I went, I was really good in school. I was telling my friends that I was really close to the kids that others weren't close to, because I knew that the outside is only what people perceive, because there's people that are hurting inside. And so I was really close to kids that other people bullied and stuff. And so I really attached to them really well. And I told my mom I didn't know where I was going to go or what I was going to do. And I was so afraid that night. And I think I kind of gave warning signs, but I don't think anybody really paid attention because everybody was so busy. And I ended up taking a whole handful of pills, and I ended up in the hospital. And I woke up there, and all my high school friends were there, and they helped me. The doctor was like, you need to keep her awake. You need to walk her. You need to keep walking with her. You need to, keep her awake so she don't, go out because she might go into a coma. And they gave me the meds to help me wake up and throw up and everything.
At that point, Toni says her loved ones stepped in with an intervention, hoping to help her turn things around. It temporarily made a difference, but after moving to Rapid City following high school, she began experimenting with drugs.
And at first I thought it was just cocaine, and and here I started to use more, and what I realized it was meth. And I got hooked on it. And
Really easy to do. I mean, meth is highly addictive.
right,
And your brain had really been set up for addiction from that earlier use from
right,
ages 9 to 11 or 12 or whatever.
right.
Your brain had been set up. So when you started using meth, I would imagine it had a powerful hold on you.
It definitely did. It's hard to explain. It's your intention is to escape. I mean, for me, was to escape and to numb my reality. And, the fear of the future, unsure of where my path was going to lead me. I was looking for a little bit of excitement and trying to find my path or my journey, and the depression was heavy. So whenever I started using meds, it spiked up my adrenaline so much.
A dopamine hit, a huge
Right.
dopamine hit, right.
I felt like a top of the world, like I could accomplish anything I could ever want and do and need. And I that was so wrong. It's a falsified high that will make you believe that it's taking you to a place where you can accomplish anything in life, when the false reality is that it destroys everything in life. And for me, I started to instantly start to realize that I was neglecting so much of who I was, and not really having a plan to do anything. And that's what brought me back to the reservation, back to the environment that I left when I was a child. And I thought I had changed. That environment was different. And I come back and it was the same environment. My mom was still there. There was still drinking. There was still dysfunction. There was still the environment that I left. And because I was an adult, I just got comfortable being in that environment, and I started drinking again and started doing drugs.
Have you lost a loved one to overdose or fentanyl poisoning? I'd like to invite you to share their story on our new Emily's Hope Memorial website called More Than Just a Number. They were our children, siblings, cousins, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, and friends. So much more than just a number. You can submit a memorial today on morethanjustanumber.org. For the next 3.5 years, Toni struggled with substance use disorder involving both drugs and alcohol. Over time, the substances she used began to change. She says she tried to ease methamphetamine withdrawal by taking prescription medication that belonged to her grandfather. But that ultimately led to an opioid addiction.
I had my son, and I'll always remember my change in life, my story, and what impacted my life is because one day reality hit me. My son, 1999, on his birthday, on March 30th, he was 2.5, 3 years old. And he said, "Mom," I was drinking a lot. And he said, "Mom," he said, "can you come to my birthday party? And but you're going to be there, right, Mom?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there, son." And I used to do that to my daughter. I'd tell her I would be there, and then I wouldn't show up. And so I knew I had to be there. Somewhere inside of me, I heard that little voice. And that's when I woke up, because that was me when I was little, wanting my mom there. And so I woke up that day and I got ready and I just said, "I'm going to quit. This is it. I need to be there for my son. I need to be there for my kids." And so I woke up and I went to his birthday party and I quit. I quit that day and I ended up going to treatment. I ended up walking in to treatment after I started getting really depressed, and I knew that I needed help. And I knew that if I didn't get help, I was on the verge of suicide at the time, because the withdrawals are so intense. And I just, it was so hard, but I did. I walked in. I really literally drug myself through the door. I was so exhausted. I was tired. I was ready. I prayed the sinner's prayer. I think at 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard Joe Osteen on the radio, and I didn't have cable or nothing, but we always get those free church channels. And so that night I heard his gospel on the radio, and I heard him say, there's someone out there suffering from addiction. There's someone out there struggling, and you're needing help. And then he was like, get on your hands and knees and pray with me wherever you're at, whatever you're doing. Don't be afraid. Yes, I got on my hands and knees, and I said the sinner's prayer, and I asked to be delivered from addiction, from the want, taste, and thought, and need. And that night and the next day, I went into the treatment center, and I asked for help.
In 2005, Toni entered a treatment center on the reservation in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. The program used the Matrix model, a highly structured approach that combines several evidence-based therapies.
The Matrix was the 6 months outpatient, and then I did 6 months aftercare. And then I did 6 months more checking in with my counselor, doing the relapse prevention. And then I was sober for a good 18 months when I stopped disengaging from, treatment. I still kept my sessions, my individual counseling sessions, but I was a good 2.5 years sober when I realized that I was feeling good about my recovery.
And having a relationship with your children, and then you decided to go back and become an addiction counselor yourself, which amazing and good for you. And how hard was that to do?
I fell into the program because they asked me to help run a grant. It was the Access to Recovery grant, and they ran it for 2 years. It was for SAMHSA. And then I was in the field of nursing to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And then I changed my major to social work. And then I, started doing my training in addictions. And so I already had my psychology background. And so then I took the training to be a counselor, and I just slowly worked my way up. I became a trainee, became a counselor, became an integrated care case manager to develop integration in behavioral health and mental health, substance abuse and mental health. And then I finished my bachelor's in social work, my master's in social work, and then I went on to get my LAC. So I became a licensed addictions counselor and then a peer recovery specialist. And then I moved on from being a counselor now to being the behavioral health director of Lakota State Counseling, where I first originally started my treatment.
Wow. That is amazing. That is amazing, considering where you came from and where you are today and everything that you've been through.
Right.
What an incredible story of survival, determination,
right,
and recovery. I mean, that's just amazing.
Resiliency.
Thank you. Yes, you're very resilient.
Right. Fighting back.
Yeah. What do you think are the solutions for Native American people, for Indigenous people, to overcome this generational problem of addiction, which I think the mental health issues and the abuse issues, all of that goes hand in hand with substance use disorder, right? Like you can't separate those things out. It's all related. So when I mentioned to you that, probably 30 some years ago, I was doing a story on Pine Ridge about alcoholism, a series actually.
Right.
And I looked at how Native American people were trying to solve the problem themselves, right? Like using their own, you can't come in. I always say you can't be somebody coming in from the outside to truly understand this world.
Right.
And I really felt at the time like it was so interesting to see how, this Native American guy was using acupuncture along with some Lakota traditions. And I mean, I'm just wondering what you think will really help Indigenous people get out of this horrible generational cyclical these levels of substance abuse that
Right.
they experienced for decades.
Many layers. There's many layers to it. I was invited to write another chapter on trauma-informed care in Indigenous communities. And so I went and dug deep into my life, my own personal story, and how I've addressed my trauma and some of the healing and some of the approaches that I've took over time. And since I been in recovery, the first 6 years was really religious based. That's how I was raised. Everything was religious for me, church based. But yet I was still searching for something deeper and a meaning and a purpose. And that's what took me back to my roots as a Lakota woman and traditional ceremonies and practices that I've been doing for the past 10, 11 years. So I've been deep into soul searching and my spirit and healing my spirit. This is only the physical flesh of what we have, but inside in your spirit, there's something that truly needs to be released inside and to heal, from, attaching or reattaching to who you are. And so your spirit and your physical senses could always have been out here just traveling and traveling, but until you bring yourself back to who you are and finding yourself and your identity. Like now I realize that I am a Lakota woman and that I have purpose and meaning in my life and who I am and where I'm going and how I am a helper, to others in this field and providing that support and that direction to them. So I've, been involved with the ceremonies and the practices, and it's been the best healing that I could ever have experienced. It has shown me things that I had never experienced before in recovery. And, it's taught me balance, it's taught me my, mental health and my security of purpose. And, it's really helped me be calm because inside for many, many years, my spirit had always been so shaken and so misunderstood and sometimes, just struggling to be able to exist, to find who I was with purpose. And so now that I am where I'm at in my life, I can see the future. I can feel the purpose and I can be able to get up every day and feel so good about what I can do for others and help guide others and help show them that their life is worth it and that they have the ability inside to make the same choices and decisions that I made and to be where I'm at today. They can do the same exact thing. They just have to search inside and find that purpose and reconnect and heal with your spirit, I believe. And so I've learned to do those things, and I think it's there's so much more to it. It's hard to explain when it comes to the traditional and the cultural approach to care and healing. But that's where I'm at today, and that's the direction that I've chose to take.
Wow, that's amazing. And I also wanted to ask you a little bit about prevention because I think about these kids on the reservations and in our MLA's Hope substance use prevention curriculum has been taught on Rosebud for the last 4 years. And I know many of those kids are experiencing in their homes the same things that you did, right? Even if they're not being offered marijuana at age 9, hopefully not, but some may be, right? And if they're not being offered substances themselves, they're seeing it. They're seeing how it's impacted adults. And so I'm hoping, and then we have a teacher on Rosebud who's incorporating Lakota culture into the lessons as well, which is a beautiful thing. But what role do you think prevention can play for young Native American children?
I wholeheartedly believe in prevention. I, do believe that, we need to be able to build up that resilience and perseverance in these children, because no matter what circumstances they're coming from, in the environment that they live in, they can still overcome all of that and build a greater future for themselves. I do know that we need to educate more on, marijuana is just not marijuana anymore.
No. And it's not for kids. That's the
Right.
thing. Yeah.
Right. It's not for
Yeah.
kids. That's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
And that, it's the harm reduction of not experiencing and not taking that first, anything that's offered to you, because those are some of my mistakes that I, tried to escape, and I think
But nobody told you. Nobody
Right.
told you. You weren't getting the message in school that
Right.
these things are bad for your brain and your body.
Right.
You didn't know.
Right. And I think, not even one. And, if anything, replace it with something that is way more productive in life, maybe going for a run, walking out in the middle of the field, just meditating, or, sometimes just taking a breath, or maybe journaling or writing, or maybe doing some type of art, or looking at what you're creative at. And for me, I'm still learning as old as I am. I became a freelance writer, and I just love to write. I love my stories when they roll out. Sometimes I pray about them first, because I want them to be truly from the heart, from inside, so that it can touch other people. And so I think, and each person has a story to tell. So I want all of our youth and those listening, or anybody, that, every person's story matters, and it can make impact. And the purpose of that is to help make change. And me growing up, that was one thing I told my mom, is that if I move back to the reservation, I want to help make change, and I want to help make impact. I want to make impact in someone's life, so I can help them make impact in another person's life. If you can touch one.
Right. It has a ripple effect.
Right.
It has a ripple effect. In everything you're doing, you're touching lives, and you have an incredibly powerful story. And I want to thank you for sharing it with us today. And thank you for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. You can check out hundreds of other episodes anytime on our website, emilyshope.charity. There you'll also find more information about our Emily's Hope K-12 substance use prevention curriculum, along with staying up to date on the latest news headlines surrounding addiction and the opioid epidemic. You can find a link to our website in the show notes. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wannenberg King and Kaylee Fitz.